I'd like to welcome you to 7 Secrets to Help Your Kinesthetic or Tactile Child Excel. So again, I'm Ricki Linksman. I'm also founder and director of National Reading Diagnostics Institute in Keys Learning, headquartered in Naperville, Illinois. Secret number 1 is success breeds success. And this applies to everybody of all ages, kinesthetic, tactile, auditory, visual, young and old. To understand this, I'm going to ask you to do an interactive activity right now. I'd like you to spend a moment and think back to a time when you were a child and you failed at something in school, maybe a school subject or even an after-school subject. Just for a moment, relive that moment of failure. Now, think about the feelings you had when you failed. Some of you might have said embarrassed, frustrated, angry, sick, dumb, stupid, low self-esteem. Now, let me ask you this. How many of you wanted to repeat those feelings again? Most people would say no, they're too painful. Now I'd like you to think back to a time when you succeeded at something. So this is a chance to redeem yourself so you don't feel like a total failure. Relive a successful experience. What feelings did you get when you succeeded? Most would say they felt happy, relieved. Did you feel proud, confident, competent, high self-esteem? Now tell me this. Would you want to repeat that experience? I'm sure most people are saying yes. So if you don't gain anything else to this point, this is the most critical secret to success. Think about what you just experienced. You wanted to avoid the experience of failure and the pain, but you wanted to repeat the experience of success and the good feelings that you had from it. When we think about learning any subject, we need to repeat the task to make the brain connections automatic and quick. For example, think about reading. Our eyes must take strange letters and symbols on a page, pass them from our eyes to our brain, and the brain has to convert them into letters, words, and ideas and thoughts. This takes some repetition. But if your child is on the failure side of life and feels bad, he or she will want to avoid the task because it's too painful, and thus not put in the needed time to become good at it. Thus, the student avoids the task because it's painful and doesn't make those brain connections and falls further behind. Parents and teachers, the most important thing to learn is how to move a child from being in a state of failure to the success side as quickly as possible. Because, every day the child stays on the failure side, we are losing that child. He's either avoiding the work or tuning out or turning off. You cannot imagine how many students I've taken from the failure side and moved them to the success side. I've taken high school gang members, students from inner cities, who people said could never learn, students who've dropped out mentally from school, disengaged, become class clowns or discipline problems. And by knowing how to move them to the success side of the board, they have made a complete turnaround. They've become so excited about learning that they wanted to come to class, they wanted to learn, and wanted to become great students. Here's the secret. Within even the toughest child, with a tough, I hate school attitude, is the same person that's inside you and me who wants to succeed. Kids are looking for someone to help unlock that bright person they know they are inside and give them the keys to their brain and their learning. Once they see that we have that key for them, they'll stick with us, respect us, and take the steps we lay out for them because they are crying for someone to help them. They want someone to show they're not dumb and stupid. So by creating successful experiences for them, we can transform them into great students. So what makes a kinesthetic child tick? Being kinesthetic does not mean they have to be always doing sports. There are many ways to be kinesthetic in an academic sense. And I hear a big sigh of relief from many of you saying, thank goodness, thinking that in order to learn how to be, they like to win. They like to achieve a goal. They like rewards. They like to win at a challenge. When they feel they can't win, they want to avoid the pain of losing. So when they cannot win at a task by accomplishing it to a success point, they tend to avoid the activity or shut down because they hate to lose. They'd rather not try than try and fail. Thus, if you feel your children are avoiding any academic task or saying they hate school, hate reading, hate math, hate homework, it could be a symptom that they've not been given the key elements to succeed and do not want to attempt it and fail. I could say this with absolute confidence that in 35 years, I have not met a single child from the ones that schools cannot even help who they send me, from high school gang members to dropouts to rebellious students, who underneath was not lurking an inner person who wanted to succeed. They're hiding inside in fear of being seen as a failure and are waiting for someone to come with the keys to their brain to help them succeed. So it's absolutely essential to find out their gaps and fill them in to be successful. And I'm going to talk more about that in secret number 2. What does success look like for tactile students? Tactile learners like to feel good. They learn best when feelings are positive. Now, you may think that's true of everyone, but tactile people are even more sensitive to positive, nonverbal, and verbal communication, more than most others. They need positive reinforcement to learn better. This equates in their mind with having people like them. If they get any negative communication, either through sarcasm, biting, or harsh criticism, frowns, negative body language, or negative tones of voice, the cognitive thinking part of the brain shuts down and tunes out. If you have a tactile child or your teacher, this might sound familiar to you. If someone makes a face at them, and you've all heard this, Mom, I can't work. And you ask why. And the child says, because my brother's looking at me funny. And you're wondering what's going on. But they're picking up negative feelings from nonverbal communication. In fact, see if this sounds familiar, they will obsess for days or weeks about why Mommy doesn't like me or why the teacher doesn't like me. And sometimes when you hear the child say, I hate math or I hate science, it has less to do with the subject and it has to do with a bad experience they had that day of someone looking at them in a way that was not smiling, or someone was using a harsh tone of voice, and they can't concentrate because that's all they're thinking of, why this person doesn't like me. And they can only get back on track for learning when that person begins acting nice to them again. So for tactile learners to succeed, we also need to fill in any gaps in learning so they can do well, but they also need positive feedback from parents and teachers. That means if they make a mistake, we can still positive way. So if you want to write this down, the first key to kinesthetic and tactile success is to keep them on the success side of the board. It's essential to know how to move a child or student from ignorance to knowledge or failure to success, which leads us to the second secret, number 2. To move students to success, we need to know what gaps they have to keep them from being successful. Okay, so this is another common question. My son is in 8th grade, and we know he's bright, but he's getting low grades in school. I don't know what the problem is, despite all the help we give him with homework. He takes a long time to do his homework because he has trouble reading. How can he be so bright and have trouble reading? He used to be an A student in early elementary school, but is now getting C's and D's in middle school. What should I do? I'm going to share with you what I did and what I do with students struggling in any class: science, social studies, math, literature, reading, any subject that involves reading and studying. So you'll get some insight in what I've done to help people, and you could learn how to do this also. This is a story about a school administrator who came and could not understand why their bright 8th grader was having trouble reading. He'd gone through 8 years of school. They were giving him a lot of help. Here we have an educator, bright parents, and the student is still getting low grade. So I gave him a reading diagnostic test using Keys to Reading Success program that I developed, and this is unbelievable. And I've seen this. I've tested entire middle schools, and it's incredible that he'd gone all the way through school and didn't know the sounds of 2 or 3 of the letters. For example, Y, they thought the sound was W. We didn't know what the letter G was. Can you imagine going through 8 years of school, and every time he came to a word with those letters, he misread the word? Well, when you misread words, the comprehension of that sentence or text is not complete. Thus, there were gaps in his comprehension in all content area classes that relied on reading. So what did it take? It took one session, taught him the sounds in his kinesthetic way, and he was back on track to success, and his grades rose back up to A's. So secret 2 is knowing what is the cause of a student getting low grades or low test scores. And if we're talking about reading, that affects all the subjects. So let me give you, we have to look at to see why a student's getting low grades or test scores. For them to raise their scores, we need to find out what is causing the low grades. And these are the possible areas that we need to look at. You can write these down if you want. We need to see, are they having trouble with content area reading? Are they having trouble with reading comprehension? You know, that's not a genetic skill. Students need to be taught how to take the words on their page, not just say the words, but turn them into thoughts. So that has to be taught. So maybe they have gaps in reading comprehension. Maybe they don't understand the different types of reading comprehension skills. You know, there are many skills like literal comprehension, inferential, main idea, time order. And so they may not know what thought processes or metacognitive processes is how to think through the different tasks. And that could be causing their problem. Maybe they have trouble with vocabulary strategies or not having a vocabulary that's matching the text that they're reading from. They haven't continued to develop their vocabulary base of new words. They could have trouble with word reading accuracy, phonics, fluency, study skills, note-taking, memory, test-taking skills, or maybe their speed is not matching the task, because there are times we need to read slowly, like when we're reading technical material, whereas we're just reading story, maybe we speed up a little bit, and maybe they don't adjust their speed for the task. For younger children, maybe they're missing phonemic awareness. So how does the student get these gaps? Well, it could be that the skills were not taught. When they were taught, the student was absent or missed out. It went too fast. And here's the big one. Maybe when instruction was given, it was not given in the student's best learning style and brain style, the combination of which link into our brain. Or maybe there's a special need and the student is not getting the adaptation and modification for that special need. So it's essential to do a reading diagnosis to find out where the student is struggling, because unless we fill in those gaps, the student is going to continue to feel like a failure, and we will continue to see avoidance of that student because it's too painful. So that's what reading success that I use at National Reading Diagnostics Institute and schools around the world is a very quick way to diagnose your student. We're going to move on to the next tip, which comes out of how we all learn in a very different way.